Call this meeting of the Public Safety Committee to order. We'll start with introductions. We do Mr. Rivera.
Felix Rivera.
Pete Peterson.
Forrest Dunbar.
Crystal Kennedy. Big Sally Calgrants.
Fred Dyson.
I want to say your again.
Big Sally.
Thank you. Dean.
Dean Cindy Thompson.
Jody Petrick, Anchorage Fire.
Bill Falsey, Municipal Manager.
Justin Dahl, APD.
Thank you. So we're running a little bit behind because the last meeting went a little long, not due to any fault of the chair. So we're going to start, and this is going to be a relatively brief discussion because it's sort of got some late-breaking information. I think this will continue with the help of the chair into either some budget meetings or some workshopping. It'll be an active part of our budget discussion going forward. But I wanted to start the conversation, or I guess continue the conversation from the last budget committee hearing today, and that is this issue related to the SAP settlement and the overtime issues that have caused some issues with the budget of the fire department. So is there a representative of the fire department? Mr. Stumbaugh, do you want to come forward too, perhaps, and sit up here, and we'll hear from you as well. Could you please sit up here, and we'll start with the administration. So either the chief or Mr. Falsey, if you would.
Oh, sure, I'm happy to. And whatever the order of dignities is, I'm happy to defer the union first. I'll say the bad news, better news. Bad news, we have a significant failure to communicate, I think. The better news is that I think we agree about a lot of things. And so let me say what I think we agree about. As we told the Budget and Finance Committee meeting, that was the last week, the fire department budget is significantly over. And we agreed that the vast majority of that has nothing to do with any decision that anyone on the fire line did or didn't take. That is largely an SAP story, and we explained that in full detail there. We also agree, I'm reading from some of the emails that went around the fire department today, that no one wants to vilify anyone for taking sick leave or light duty or being on FMLA. We don't want firefighters coming to work. We don't want firefighters coming to work ill. We don't want firefighters coming to work ill. We don't want people pushing it and coming out of light duty before they're ready. FMLA is not just a federal entitlement, it is actually a good idea. There is no vilification by passing around the information I sent in an email to you in the assembly that sick leave is at historically high levels. It was just reporting a fact. We get a budget that we were able to manage in 2017 and 2018, and that was built in 2019, assuming a level of sick leave and temporary hardship leave. And we're just way over that this year. And there's no aspersions being cast. I assume that is because there was more people who needed to take sick leave and because there was more temporary personal hardships that people were working through. We do have a system to monitor if sick leave is being abused. We have not ferreted out the sick leave abuse. So it was mostly to report that there is a budgetary problem that is caused by that. And so we are putting in a policy to address that level of problem. We are not trying to balance the fire department's budget on the backs of the firefighters. And in fact, the policy that we announced over the weekend doesn't come close to fixing the full amount of the fire department's problems. That will be something that we're looking to address in the 2019 budget. But it's also not a punishment. I mean, there's no one being punished for any activity here. If we say, today you're not reporting to Station 14, I need you to go to Station 4 and help me out. No one's being punished for that. We're just turning the only dial that we really have to bring the fire department budget closer in to where it was supposed to land. So I will personally apologize. The email that I wrote was to the assembly members who had the benefit of having had the longer discussion where we set the stage for what the level of fire department challenge was and what its relative causes were, and sort of presumed that background. That got picked up and sent to the whole department. We didn't have that background, and so I can completely understand how and why it may have been poorly received. We'll do better in the future, but I think the better news is that we do have a lot of shared understandings, and I don't think there's an extreme difference of opinion on all that. So that's the...
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. Before we have questions for Mr. Falsey, I'd like to hear from Mr. Stumbaugh. If you could identify yourself for the record, please.
Mike
Like
Stumbaugh. I don't know if I ever need it in my life, actually.
Mike can project.
Mike Stumbaugh, STUMBAUTH. I'm the president of Local 1264, IFF, the Anchorage Firefighters Union. And I appreciate that, Mr. Falsey. And maybe there is a lack of communication. I do somewhat disagree that it feels like punishment. Today, we have two apparatus closed. We have truck 1 and we have tender 9 closed. Yesterday we closed truck 1 because a firefighter had to go home because his wife had emergency appendicitis. Today, I don't know if you recall, a couple of weeks ago, there was a young man killed in a motorcycle accident in South Anchorage. His father is a firefighter. So that tender is closed because he's not at work mourning the loss of his son. It's those kind of issues and things that happen, not daily, but they do happen. We have life, right? We have leave and we're supposed to use it. And so now our services are being reduced. And no fault of these people's, but because they're not at work. So there's a true fear. We had a person yesterday who sent his child to school because he didn't want to be the first one to close an apparatus by calling in sick. You know, that is actually really happening in the department. So this policy, to me, seems misguided at best. We also truly have a budget problem, but it seems like we have one every year. And I would hope, with this body and with the administration, that we get a reset budget, if you will. We need to start the year off on the proper footing. So if we have an academy, which is scheduled for early next year, as I emailed you all, if we don't get money for that, we're going to be behind in January, and we're not going to catch up. That's just a fact. You know, these are $1 million academies. They're a lot of money. It's a lot of people, and we need them. But if we don't get that kind of money, you might as well close some things or lay some people off, quite frankly, because we're going to be behind.
So I've heard, and if anyone has, Fred, I'll ask a question, then you'll be next in line. So I had heard that, you know, the AFD's overtime budget is, for whatever reason, we blow it every year. Like we set it too low and then we go through it every year. So I guess I have a question for both parties about, you know, is this primarily a discussion about this year's budget, what we need to do to make sure we don't go too far over this year's budget, or is it more about being more realistic with next year's budget when it comes to overtime and the academy costs?
I'll jump in first, and then I'll hand it to the chief. I think the short answer is both. High level observation. The money that goes to the various departments is appropriated largely as a lump sum. This is the total amount of money that the fire department has to work with. We build that at various line items, and it is the case that the fire department overtime line item has not matched real overtime expenditures. But that's not particularly to the fire department. If you pick up any of the department's budgets, there's a lot of care and feeding and cleanup that needs to happen. The tire line item in the people mover system is way wrong. The diesel futures purchase line item in biggest department, the streets department, is wrong. And that's part of my mission to clean that all up. We've been making the directors do all this budget training. We've been telling the budget officers to fix all that so we can true it up. 2017, 2018, the overtime line item was wrong as well, but we made it all work. We put everything in the soup and we figured out how to get it there. So to the second question, what are we talking about this year or next year? A little bit of both. What we said for this year is, if we are now, the only way that we can save money in the fire department, short of firing people in the main, is not buying stuff, and we've sort of not bought the stuff that we can afford not to buy, and turning off overtime by temporarily taking things out of service when we otherwise would have to call in extra bodies. Now that we're in the rainy, cold season, we can safely do that at some tenders, various trucks. It is not anybody's idea of a good time. It does reduce our service capabilities, but we're trying to bring the budget in as close as we can, because every dollar we overspend in the fire department is budget dollar that we don't have to address all the other challenges that we are trying to address as an assembly and with homelessness and whatnot. You haven't unfurled the 2020 budget, but there too, there's a lot of agreement. We are keenly aware that the academy has to be fully funded. And there was a bit of a mistake that happened this year. You may recall that in the budget season, we actually were trying to balance all the various factors, and we initially had proposed a permanent reduction of an apparatus out of the fire department, and we reversed that in the final call. We didn't fully attend to the fact that when we brought that apparatus back in, that the academy we would need to run was going to be bigger than it originally was planned to do, and that was one of the budget challenges. We said, well, figure it out, Jody. There's no more money. We're past that now, but we've gone over that bridge. But for 2020, we're saying we're going to give you all the money you need for a real academy to do it correctly. And so I think the answer is, this year we have just said we're going to turn the dial. That is the only dial we really have to try to come in as close as we can. It's not actually going to get to zero. And next year we're going to try to do it right. So I don't know if I stole all of your content.
He did not steal all my thunder. I want to reiterate that for As far back as we can go, the fire department not only had a reputation, but the fact is we did not make budget. And if we continue in this state of continuation budgets built based on, this is what we gave you last year, other than pay raises, you're not getting any other money, we will not come in under budget, no matter what we do. So for the entire time I've been with the department, we shut down the only thing that we had control of, which was spending. That means we have buildings that don't have enough power to have heat in the bays, so that our ambulances can't stay as warm as they need to do for patient care. We can't get our gear cleaned because, again, we don't have all of the apparatus we need to keep our gear cleaned, which could result in our people developing cancer. We don't have enough staff at the administrative level to do all the things we need to do. So we're in a situation just like everyone else in the municipality of continued deferred maintenance that's costs us problems in the long run, and not enough staff to do the work that's required of us. We have, for years, brought this to OMB and other people and tried to resolve the issue, and it really comes down to, we get our personnel budget, and whatever is left over from paying base salaries and benefits and leave and those kind of things, that's what our overtime budget is. For at least a decade, we have spent $4.6 million on overtime. And that is for a wide variety of things. It's not just to cover leave. But we have never built a budget that really reflected the amount and demonstrated the amount of overtime that we needed to really cover our bases and maintain minimum staffing. That is not the fault of the union. That is not the fault of the lack of trying on everyone's parts. We just, if the money is not there, the money is not there. So we're at that point. We've been working with OMB and with Mr. Falsey's office for 2021, let's build the budget that the fire department really needs to deliver the level of service that the community expects. Unfortunately, as all things that happen within the municipality and government entities in general, change takes a while, and if we don't have additional income or revenue, we don't know how we're going to make that happen. So that's where we're at, is we, no matter what we do, we need overtime. We are an overtime dependent organization because we have a minimum staffing. There's an expectation from the community that we will deliver a service. So until that is addressed, we'll be in this situation. And we can't cut anywhere else. As Mr. Falsey demonstrated in the last meeting, we have $5 million of somewhat discretionary funds, basically our non-labor budget, to pay for everything. And for a big organization, fuel, tires, turnout gear, training. Perfect example, and you'll see this, you'll hear about this again. For our entire organization, we have $50,000 to spend for training, or for travel related, majority of which is related to training. So I have 400 people, and we try to keep them educated and in a progressive mode so that we can continue to deliver the right type of service for the community. I've got to do that with $50,000. It's impossible. So we're lagging in all areas.
I'm sorry, we have relatively little time to deal with this issue. I want to give the union, if you want, a chance to respond to that, and then I've got questions from Mr. Dyson, Ms. Solotel, and Mr. Weddleton. Hopefully those are relatively short questions, and we have to move on to the next topic. This is not the primary focus of this meeting. Do you have anything directly on that?
No.
Okay. Mr. Dyson, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. I'll just outline them, and you can get the answers to me, the next time we meet on this issue. I was astonished to find out that it seems to me that you have about 3 times as many medical calls as you do fire calls, and that was startling to me. Secondly, I'd be interested in what's a kind of a little historic picture of that 5-8 years back of the envelope, stuff. And then what is the impact of our significant homeless population on your calls for medical services and all of that? And we saw, I think, somewhere that some of the medical people, they almost want bodyguards to go with them on some calls. Is that impacting it? And obviously a thing you can't control is your clients, your customers. That's absolutely out of it. And then the taking of units out of service means that unit is not available because there's not enough staff to make the minimum staffing levels.
Correct.
Yeah, so it, practically speaking, has that been an impact? If we needed another rig and it wasn't available because of being out of service and stuff, I want more than just the policy. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Mr. Dyson. So those answers might be for a later meeting then.
Yeah.
This is a very new policy, so I'm going to assume that we haven't yet had a case where we needed a rig and it wasn't available.
It started October 1st, so that will be data that we
Sure.
collect.
Legitimate concern.
Absolutely. Primary concern. Ms. Salatone?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I just be reminded what the gap is for funding right now? What's our shortfall? What's the dollar amount?
It moves in real time because partly it will depend on the actual amount of leave cash out we have to pay at the end of the year. We hope to get a signal on that in first from the executive and the non-reps who had the cash out on September 30th, and so we'll turn to Frank and have a better understanding of burying the lead. We think it's in the order of $4 million, but we don't exactly know yet, and we're hoping that it might even come south of $4 million as we see what leave cash out actually looks like, given that there has been extra leave really used and consumed this year. So about 4%.
Additional questions?
Yeah, one may, I may follow up. And what is the planned or anticipated cost savings from the policy?
It's pretty marginal.
It is pretty marginal. It's not $4 million. We expect that from the projected amount of days in which we are going to have overtime caused by sick leave, that it's probably 10 to 15 times between now and the end of the year that anything even comes out of service. And so we're in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, not the millions of dollars.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Salatone. Questions? Mr. Weldon?
That's a question that, because I'm not bashful about displaying my complete ignorance. But my understanding is that because of the Kelly shifts that they use, there's actually some overtime embedded in that I think I think of as, well, that's their regular pay, but it's defined as overtime. So, because it looks bad, you say there's huge overtime budget, why is that? But isn't that integral to just the way they're paid?
Yes, so under the Fair Labor Standards Act, our employees work a 56-hour work week. 53 of those hours we pay straight time. So when they work their 24-hour shift, they don't get overtime for anything over 8. It doesn't work that way. So out of every week, they get 3 to 6 hours of what we call Fair Labor Standards Act, which is overtime money to bridge that gap. That is embedded within our overtime budget, but it is already, it's allocated as part of our personnel expenses. So yes, you are correct. And we have funding for that. It's the additional overtime that we use for minimum staffing requirements.
Okay, so I think a visual thing, most people look at, you see a huge amount of overtime, you go, bad management, they should parse it, but it's, even if you have the perfect amount of people at all times, you have a line
Yes.
for overtime that's really just fundamentally the regular pay.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr.
As
Weldon.
ignorant as I thought.
Thank you, Mr. Weldon. A good point. So I think that'll be enough for today. We'll pick this back up either a budget committee meeting or at a work session. And perhaps this will be, a $4 million gap is something we're going to be talking about. Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you.
All right, we're moving on now to item B. This was requested by Mr. Dyson, and I hope I conveyed what he was looking for. So it's a report on white-collar crime, particularly fraud against seniors and other vulnerable adults. And Chief Dahl, has the APD been able to, do you have anything to present on this?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not 100% clear on exactly what information is being sought, but I do have a detective with me today. We're happy to answer questions on this topic. I don't have a specific presentation. I thought it might be better if we just answer people's inquiries directly.
Okay. So who's the detective? You want to come up and
Detective Wilman.
identify yourself for the record, please?
I'm Detective Tiffany Wilson.
Do you want to come on up and sit up here? And is there anybody here from any other law enforcement agencies? For example, the FBI? who deals with this? All right. Okay. Please come up as well. If you would. Yeah, could you you both please identify yourself for the record?
I'm Detective Tiffany Loafman, Loughman.
With the APD.
Yes.
I'm Jeff Peterson. I'm the special agent in charge of the FBI here in Alaska. And it's O-N, not E-N.
Wonderful. No relation.
No relation.
So, Mr. Dyson, do you want to, Fred?
Yeah, thank you.
Do you want to?
Yeah, so fundamental question is, what do you all know about what's going on in our community that's illegal that should know in administration in order to do our job better? We need to be informed. We want to be as helpful as we can, but we need to kind of get a sense of what the problem is. So white collar crime ends up being theft of some sort without violence, without breaking and entering, and so on. So in my conversations with a couple of your officers here, I asked about cybercrime, and kind of what the impression I got was all APD is not doing much except in exploitation of children, and so on. And the white collar crime where people are trying to steal your identity or your financial information, often through electronic means, is not something that APD deals with because it's kind of out of their jurisdiction and don't have the capacity to it. So that's why I'm delighted that you're here, sir, because my sense is we've got a lot of that kind of crime happening. Most people don't know it. Sure, we ought to have it better informed, but we need you all to describe to us the magnitude of the problem, who the victims are, if there's a way of sorting them demographically, and what in the world we can do to help you and help the people in our community.
I think we do a great job as far as partnership. APD works with FBI when there's
Sure.
a suspect that's out of jurisdiction. The thing you're asking, there's certain demographics and it affects different age groups differently. So my expertise lies more in like the elder fraud, and by elder we'd find that as over 60. And I think the piece that is probably the most crucial is just educating our elderly. And a lot of times it's not educating the elderly, but people that take care of them, that are caregivers and that see them on a daily basis to know what to look for in that elder to help them out. And so we work with Office of Public Advocacy. They have an elder fraud division, and they work with the civil part of that, financial protective orders that protect elders from further occurrences or recovering money. So we work with the criminal side of it. Office of Elder Fraud works with the civil side of it, if you will. And the Attorney General's office works with some of those things too. So we all kind of work together in partnership for that. So it may not seem like APD is doing things necessarily, but we are working with our partners.
Which is wonderful.
Right, to try.
May I, so parenthetically, what else is going on in white collar crime that is not using electronics to get at it?
By and large, with elder fraud, a lot of the victims are, the suspects are people that the victims know. So it's a family member or somebody that knows that this person's vulnerable and takes advantage of them. So, by and large, once again, it's education and making sure that people that are taking care of elders.
So there's not much mail fraud anymore?
There's certainly mail fraud. I wouldn't say that that's necessarily targeted at elders. I think that's just a
And are there businesses, commercial fraud going on?
I wouldn't say there's so much commercial fraud going on. When you're talking embezzlement, I think those cases are by and large pretty small in comparison to other things. Certainly there's mail fraud any one of us could be a victim of mail fraud. It's just a crime of opportunity. Elder fraud is another crime of opportunity with a different set of suspects.
Yeah. So
I would just add in too on the mail fraud issue. APD works closely with U.S. Postal Inspection Service. We have officers that are designated as task force officers with USPS, and so we have the ability to work very closely with them, and we do on almost daily basis.
So, Fred, I've got a question here for Mr. Wells.
Sure.
Well,
Not much mail fraud, but we hear about people getting into mailboxes nonstop. What are they doing?
There is a lot of mail fraud, but we're talking about very different things as far as they're not targeting elders necessarily. So we're talking about apples and oranges, really.
Okay, so you're saying not much mail fraud for elders, but
They're not targeted specifically for mail fraud necessarily.
I think mail fraud tends to be, as the detective pointed out, because it's a crime of opportunity, it's just whatever mailbox they happen to get into. It's not necessarily a particular demographic that is targeted in any specific way.
Yeah, so, but we're not limiting our interest to specific demographic groups. And certainly the people that break in the mailbox, they're looking for checks and so on and so forth, but that's a tool to get at identity theft.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so, this last 3 months, my wife and I run into the same one. Phone call, your computer's been infected, and we're calling from Microsoft or AT&T to help you fix it, turn your machine on, you know, and so on. So what can we as citizens do to report those kind of things and help you guys get on the trail? I mean, I'll just ask out here in the hall. I always say to the person, let me call you back, you know, and that doesn't work. But is there anything that our reporting those kind of things do that would be in any way useful?
Absolutely. I think anytime a crime is committed, it should be reported. And sometimes I think people think, oh, well, it's just my whatever, or it's just my whatever. And they don't report that, but it's really helpful when they report it either on the phone or online, because then we can see a pattern and we can address that pattern with, with our partners. So absolutely, reporting is huge. And I'm going to go back again to that education piece of educating people to look for these things and to report them and to be aware. And I think our public information office does a fantastic job of trying to push those things out once we know about it. But I think people often are more likely to report on Facebook than they are to necessarily call APD. And so we see that more and more through social media. And maybe they think that we're getting that from Facebook, but we don't. We just need to encourage them to report that so that we can address the problems.
You don't have a Nigerian prince that is a long-lost relative that is trying to send you $5 million. Okay,
Or African.
That actually, what you said is a great tool to say, let me call you back.
Yeah.
About 99% of the time, that will stop that phone call. The United States government will not call and ask you for money, ever. I don't think the municipality will either. We will not turn off your social security number. That's a phone call that's been going around nationally lately. Those are scams. If you have a problem with the Social Security Administration, pick up the phone and call them or go down there. They will not contact you over the telephone, demand money. One of the things that we offer, that the police department offers as well through us, is a thing called the Internet Crime Complaint Center. So that's one of those, if you're not sure, if you get a suspicious email, if you, God forbid, fall victim to a scam for a relatively low amount of money, you can go to www.I, the letter I, the letter C as in Charlie, 3, the number 3.com, IC3. And at that website, you'll be prompted to enter information about your complaint, a website, an IP address, a telephone number, any information you have. Now, that doesn't guarantee that we're going to be able to get money back for you or whatever, but that information is aggregated internationally. So the victim that you might have potentially been, you could be one of 100,000 victims. And by looking at that IP address, that telephone number, that website, allows us to build a case perhaps down the road. Unfortunately, many of these folks are overseas in places that we don't extradite, but it does let us at least aggregate the information and know maybe what we're dealing with.
Yeah, I hope at the end of this conversation that we decide that we need to do a better job of getting people informed. And I would love to see some crusading journalists really do a whole article about this. And I hope that it would be neat if we could get the newspaper and some other stuff to every few months, you telling them about the new scams that are going on.
Scam of the month.
For us, so maybe every 3 hours.
Yeah, maybe.
But for people to watch out for,
Yep.
and try to sensationalize this enough that people are reading it and seeing it. One thing I skipped that's in your bailiwick is we've seen in the papers some institutional stuff, like in our Crystal and I's area, the activity person at the school that bled off tens of thousands of dollars, of school money, and we've seen that in a couple of nonprofits. in one small city and stuff. Is it much of that kind of thing going on?
I would say those embezzlement cases are by and large pretty small in comparison to the theft and mail theft and some of the other things that we're talking about. They're generally sensationalized more, if you will, just because of the school district and they're victimizing children. So you probably hear about those more than the day-to-day the other crimes that are being committed. They're more. Did that answer your question?
No, you're doing fine. So you're telling me there's isolated issues, not a huge tail
Correct.
sort of scale.
We just tend to hear about those more, and so.
Yeah. Aside from getting into your electronic files, are there other kinds of, like, getting copies of people's information on their credit cards or something? Other ways of getting at their Social Security that are happening in our community?
I think probably one of the more prolific ways of that goes back to mail theft. You're getting your credit card bill in the mail. Some people still do, a lot of people. Things like that. Anything that has PII, we call it personally identifiable information that comes through the mail, is always going to be to some degree subject, to theft. I'm not saying, as we discussed earlier, there's a huge problem with mail theft in the city, because there's not. But just know that if you don't have a locking mailbox or a P.O. box, an opportunist could take advantage of that.
Right, I have a couple other questions here, if that's all right.
Sure. And who's here from the prosecutor's office? Would you come up, please?
Great, and then I've got questions from Mr. Welton and Ms. Kennedy.
This might be a comment, but my wife told me she's going to something on Friday that's a couple hours about elder financial crime.
And it may be through the Office of Public Advocacy, which is one of our partners.
She's not 60 yet, so I think she's going to help.
Yeah, so and the big push is
Clarify that,
not,
right?
So what we've learned is that if we've tried to preach this stuff to the elderly, they may or may not understand what we're talking about, and so our big push now is to educate those that are taking care of them or seeing people on a daily basis, so that they can watch for clues with the elders and may be able to navigate and prevent a lot of those things from happening in the first place.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to talk about one of the newest, well, I don't know if it's a new one or not, but the one that my mom and dad and my in-laws have dealt with recently has been a phone call that says, Grandma, this is Kyle, and I've been in this accident, and I've had this terrible cold, so I know I don't sound like myself, but I was with my friend, and my friend had drugs in the car, and if you don't send $1,000 to this guy I'm going to give you over to, I'm going to be in jail for however long. Don't call Mom and Dad. Please don't call Mom and Dad. They'll kill me. But they just go on and on and on. My dad has gotten one 3 times, one from my oldest son, supposedly, one from my youngest son, and one from my cousin, and then my in-laws got one from my oldest son, supposedly. So anyway, but when you play along with these people and you ask more questions trying to figure out who this is, they have answers. So I don't know if this is just such an amazingly sophisticated con, or if they're actually, my parents' question was, how did they know some of the specifics about our family enough to play that game? So where are they getting some of this information? Because my parents want to know, okay, what have I put out there, on Facebook or whatever that might, and maybe that's the answer.
And it's actually called the grandparent scam, and it's very common. Unfortunately, it happens a lot over breaks, over Christmas break, spring break, around spring break time. And by and large, we believe that they're getting that information, not necessarily from an older person's Facebook or social media, but from the younger one. Hey, I went to see Grandma, in Anchorage, or I'm on my way to Anchorage, and some of those kinds of things. Things that they're posting online that may seem innocuous at the time, but that's how they're gleaning information. And sometimes they're not even using an actual child's name. It's just, hey, it's your grandson. That's true. Something in general, and then your brain kind of fills in the gaps. So once again, it goes right back to the education part of, people that are around and elder that say, hey, that's not right. Don't do this, and having this open dialogue with your family that you're going to share information. But it's very common, unfortunately. It's called the grandparent scam.
That is very interesting. Well, by the time my dad got the 3rd one, he had so much fun with that one. It was like, you no good, worthless grandson. How dare you try to call me and get more money? We've got we stopped talking to you years ago. Why are you anyway?
Right. And this is actually, if you would prefer, I can speak to just the specific scam, just to give you a presentation on that at a later time if you wish. And that may,
Yeah, and it could be
Romance schemes.
valuable for both of you to do that a little bit, sensitive to our time.
Yeah, I have a question for Mr. Rivera, and then if you have some final, and then Ms. LaFrance, and then if you have any final questions or comments, Mr. Dyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, 2 questions. First, are there any programs or resources for younger folks to educate their parents or grandparents on what to watch out for? And then second, speaking from a millennial perspective, and I know this is a little bit outside of the topic, but are there any of these types of frauds that are targeted towards millennials, and what do those look like?
Yeah, the FBI has a couple of programs on that. If you go to our website, fbi.gov, there are some special programs designed for preteens and teens. And it talks about, don't be exploited. It talks about sexploitation, which is a big one for us, but also just overall using your internet, your connections. This is the Snapchat generation. It is the Instagram generation. And, our education pieces are, hey, once that's out there, it's out there forever, right? And it lets predators, it lets scam artists, con men, whatever you want to call it, into their lives. And we've got a pretty aggressive international campaign that's on the website. You can go there and find it. We'd be happy again to team up with APD and come talk to you guys at any time about all of these frauds and scams. And it's something that, it seems somewhat innocuous on the surface, but once they get into your life, it can be overwhelming. And so we're certainly looking at that. And the best way we could, again, education from kids to seniors, and particularly with seniors that, just because you're over 60 doesn't mean you're not on the internet, right? And we see things like romance scams for the elderly. That is one of the big ones, actually. And it just appeals to folks who maybe are a widow or a widower. I know I switched channels on you here a little bit, but that's the kind of thing most people wouldn't think of, at the old folks' home. But it is one of the more popular ones. So that's the kind of stuff we'd love to come talk to you about in partnership with APD and be happy to do that at any time.
And Mr. Rivera, the financial scam targeted us is called college.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sub-fraud tuition, yeah.
Just a quick question on the magnitude. Do you have any idea on the dollar value in terms of impact to scams against members of our community?
I don't have a specific dollar amount.
Over 100 million?
No, I wouldn't think so.
I would not think so, yeah. I'd be surprised.
I think overall, nationally the numbers are all pretty extravagant, approaching the billions of dollars. But that is, we're talking about the entire population of the country. I don't have any specific numbers for Anchorage. I wasn't prepared to go that deep here today, but we could probably look into that.
So, Mr. Dyson, you have some.
Yeah, so 2017, the state dismissed 7,000 cases because they didn't have the staff to take them to trial, which is appalling, and so on. And I understand that the state has refused in real time to take some cases that are low-level felony cases that are beyond our capacity, and take those cases.
So
Please.
I'm the city prosecutor.
Yeah, I know.
So what was your question?
Yeah, is the state not fulfilling their responsibility to take felony cases that come from us?
I can't speak to the DA's charging decisions.
Ma'am, could you identify yourself?
Oh, sorry, I'm Sarah Stanley, the municipal prosecutor.
Thank you.
So we would generally, we do not see pretty much no white collar crimes are referred to my office.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm talking about crime in general that are beyond the misdemeanor threshold that is happening in our city. Some of it investigated by our police, that the state's not picking them up and prosecuting them like they didn't in 2017.
I don't know the current numbers on what they're declining
Right.
or not. or
So
dismissing.
we want to know what's falling through the crack, on crimes that the state is not picking up. And they're shorter of resources probably than we are, but it's still a real world problem that they want a deal. Quick anecdote, got a friend, used to be a coroner, he's a retired forensic physician. He gets cases like this. 85-year-old man with a estate of 1.6 million gets a new personal caregiver, falls in love and marries her, and 3 weeks later he dies. And oh, by the way, his attending physician was the main squeeze of the personal caregiver. And those are the kind of things that us old folks can fall for. But sorry?
Sounds like a made-for-TV movie.
Yeah, only in Alaska. All right. Thank you for doing this, Chairman. And I hope that we come out of here, perhaps in partnership with the administration, with a plan to, in an effective way, get more information out about the scams that are going on and the self-defense things that you both have talked about in a way that people are going to consume. Just telling people in general if there's a seminar available or a website you can go look to, I think is inadequate. We need to do a better job of communication. I just challenge us all to think about that and with the administration, figure out how we can do a better job. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. I guess my last question or comment then for Special Agent Peterson. We have quite good, I think it's quite good, our APD sort of public information agencies that does a really good job, I think, actually getting things out. How closely have you worked with them, or are you willing to work with them to do what Mr. Dyson is describing?
We have historically worked very closely. I know MJ personally. All of us at the FBI pretty much follow the Nixles with them. We work together on any press release, any common event that we're going to do together. The chief's people are all the time over at our building. We're all the time over there. Any opportunity we see to partner, because especially in Alaska, partnerships are essential, and the best partnership I've ever seen, and this is my 5th field office all over the United States. So yeah, I'm in a little bit of a gap right now. I'm without a public information officer, so we've been a little light in that arena lately, but as soon as we do, we are all full steam ahead in doing this kind of thing.
And I would just add, Mr. Chair, we are extremely well aligned with the Anchorage FBI field office, and in fact, as SAC just pointed out, they have a little bit of a gap in their PIO office right now. We've actually been helping fill that in a little bit, and we do that with all of our partner agencies. I communicate multiple times every week, sometimes on the weekends with the SAC. We talk all the time, and that's reflected all the way down through both agencies. So.
Special Agent in Charge, FBI term.
He's the boss of the Anchorage office, which represents all of Alaska.
Great.
You rarely see, unless it's strictly a city issue, you will not see Justin on television without me standing next to him, or vice versa. And that's why we like it.
Yep. Well, thank you very much for coming. Thank you all for being here. And, we might end up doing some kind of follow-up in the future.
Absolutely.
And we look forward to whatever you figure out in terms of getting this information out to the public. I don't know where these came from. These just appeared in front of us, but thank you for these.
I brought
as well.
those, and there's more here if you'd like to read about those.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have about 2 minutes, 3 minutes here, Jennifer. Yeah, we'll take 5 minutes so we can set up the PowerPoint and the next presentation. So we'll take a very quick break now.
I like starting off.
Thank you. Thanks for what you do.
I'm gonna try to like go back and listen to everything that I caught when I came in.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, over there. Oh, she went down to speak to the parking
But she said we like their home.
It really does sound nice. She's cooking. Yeah, so this is just we're on the
There is a huge number of received.
It's an age thing. Nice to meet you.
Just gonna take a look and see what brochures. Interesting stuff.
And brainstorm.
We were just getting up and
Kendra, are you ready? Stuff today. There's a lot of stuff across the line. All right, are we ready to start? Everybody can take their seats. Get going. Okay, Kendra, are you ready to start? Okay. So we're to item C now on our agenda, the topic of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. This was a topic suggested to me by Ms. Closter, who is the executive director, is the correct term, of Native Peoples Action. So we have a presentation today, and the chief has agreed also to speak a little bit on this issue. And if the people who are presenting have specific questions they want to ask the chief as well, this is an appropriate time to do so. So, Kendra, please take it away. Oh, and everybody, before you talk, if you identify yourself for the record, we appreciate it.
Great. I'm Kendra Foster. I'm Executive Director of Native Peoples Action. I'm originally from Wrangell, Juneau area. I've been in Anchorage for about 10 years now. I am Tlingit. I'm here raising my family. And I also brought with me a few other people that I want to make sure get introduced. And then Rochelle's going to start us off on this.
Van Quincy, good morning. Choji Rochelle Adams Oji. My name is Rochelle Adams. I'm from the villages of Fort Yukon and Beaver in the interior, and I live here in Anchorage now with my 3 children. I'm the Indigenous Engagement Coordinator for Native Peoples Action.
Tamara Truitt-Giroux, Tammy. I'm the Executive Director of the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center from Anvik, living in Fairbanks. We're doing a lot of work both statewide for tribes and with tribes and nationally and internationally.
I'm sorry, can you say your organization again?
Alaska Native Women's Resource Center.
And so before we begin today, I just want to thank everyone for being here. And I want to ground us and do a land acknowledgement to honor the original people of this land. This land is the Dena'ina people's homeland. Just like anywhere in Alaska, it's the indigenous homelands of all of our people across the state. And so I would like to just take a quick moment and have everyone think about the place that they had grown up. And think about the land that you grew up on, and the waters, and the mountains, and your connection with that land. And take that feeling that you have for that land and acknowledge that that is the love and that is the connection that the Dena'ina people have for this land here, that we call Anchorage. And so I would like everyone to help me to acknowledge that and to give thanks to the Dena'ina for being the original stewards of this land, and to say Chinan. Chinan. So thank you, everyone. I like to start with that grounding, just to honor the indigenous people, and that's really what we're talking about here today. So, the next one. So as we begin, we do this work out of love, and it's out of love for our families, our mothers and daughters, our grandmothers and our grandchildren in the future, our aunts, because we all have important women in our lives, right? I come from a strong family of matriarchal women with the love I have for my mom and my daughter. And I know all of us do here in this room. We all have those women that are so important in our lives. And I just want to take a moment for you to think about that love that you have for your family. And as a woman, how important you are to your family. And that's why we're here today. It's out of that love that we do this work. And in this work, we do it with intention and respect and caring for them, because this is a hard topic for us. It's very hard for us to talk about. But we know that this work needs to be done, and we're not alone. This is not something that's only in Anchorage or it's only in Alaska. This is a crisis that we're facing nationwide and in Canada and in other parts of the world. And so what we're looking at is our mothers and our daughters are going missing. They're being murdered. They're being abducted. They're missing. And a lot of times we don't have closure. And these cases aren't being acknowledged. And there's no justice for them. There's no data for them. And it's hardly in the media. And so it's up to us to move forward in this, to try to figure out a way together in this crisis, and what are we going to do about this? And so here with our partners and our friends on local levels, state levels, federal, we want to come together and see what we can do together with the resources that we have, how we can help each other, because this crisis is home. This is as close as we can get in our homes. It's so important. So that's why we're here today. And thank you to all of you for giving us this space to begin this conversation. So Masit Cho, thank you. And we wanted to begin by showing a video.
There's a huge number of missing and murdered Indigenous women in Alaska.
When a woman leaves the village, you know, it's a really small community, and then when they get into the bigger city, they're very vulnerable to violence.
Native women are easy targets because society sometimes looks at Native people as less than and not worthy of respect.
Racism is a process of dehumanizing. The more dehumanized the population is, the more they can be targeted.
Men think that they can violate Native women, and it's a norm.
The majority of perpetrators of violence against Native women are white males.
The man who raped me and chased me with a gun was a man who specifically targeted Native girls. I can still feel the pellet in my leg from that shotgun. I'm not even unique. This happens all the time.
I don't know one Alaskan Native woman who hasn't been a victim of sexual violence.
We're not throwaways.
We've got each other that we can hold on to, and we are, you know, all sisters in this together.
And we have to change that language of rape culture and abuse and violence, and we need to hold those people accountable.
Women are our most valuable resource. They're the life givers. You know, they're the ones that take care of our precious families.
They say when we tell our stories, we heal ourselves. And we heal our ancestors. And every time that we get up and we do something to honor them, to serve them, we're the answer to those prayers.
That video is always hard for me to watch. This is a picture here. We do healing circles and drum circles because this work isn't just statistics and numbers. When we get together, unfortunately our list grows of our granddaughters and mothers, sisters, friends, and we have to keep adding names to this board and to our lists. And so when we're doing this work, we also have to heal. And so we continually do our drum circles and we work to heal together, but we really have to push for change so we don't have to keep adding people to our lists. And it's really hard on us. It's really frustrating, but we really appreciate the time to be able to be here with everybody and talk about this really important work that we're doing and that we're doing together with the community. And everyone has a role in this. Everyone from our communities to individuals, tribal leaders, everybody in this room from, you know, we've got folks from the FBI and APD and so I'm going to get into a little bit statistics, but I just think it's important for understanding, seeing the faces of what we work on every day and the stories that we hear, and it's a lot about healing as we do this work at the same time. A report was just released in September of this year where Alaska ranks first in the United States. It's the highest rate of females being murdered by men. And half of those individuals that were murdered were actually Native women. And these are the type of statistics that we have to keep reading. A little bit about this photo I want to explain. The one on the top is actually myself with Amber Webb. We went to the Alaska State Legislature, and the cuspuk behind her are the faces of just a few of our Alaska Native women. And she's actually working on more projects, and I just want to recognize her. She was invited and wants to hopefully come here and bring the cuspuk to show you. But these are real women that have been missing and murdered, and each one of them have a story behind them. 4 out of 5 American Indian, Alaska Native women and girls experience violence in their lifetime. We heard from the video that when we talk to our sisters, pretty much all of us have that story. We have some type of story to share. And our data doesn't back this up. We don't have the information, so I can tell you that the data I might tell you or that we're saying is not going to be encompassing of everything. We're missing in the data. And these stories and all these women that the picture right below, again, are just a few. They're just a few of the faces that are coming behind this story and this data. A couple other things before I move on. The risk of rape and sexual assault is 2.5 times higher for Native women than the rest of the country. And murder is the 3rd leading cause of death for Native women. Again, this is not even encompassing. The numbers are underestimated, and the true extent of violence, systemic racism, underreporting, misclassification, and there's distrust in law enforcement as well. I've heard many stories as we do this work of misclassification, and that's a hard one too that we have to work with law enforcement of and get down to the bottom of the root of the problem. Is we're not collecting the data on our races, so you can't look up data and say this is how many Native women are really truly represented, because that information is not collected. And in this report I'll talk about here in a few minutes, it'll get into that a little bit more. We also have classifications of when it's murder and they'll say it's suicide, or they'll say it's unclassified, where we're not getting that true data either. And those are questions that we have and things that need to be solved. The Urban Indian Health Institute put out a report. In February of 2019 it was released. And what they saw is we weren't getting information about what was happening in our urban centers. We have a number of people that have moved in from the villages into Anchorage, Fairbanks, Juneau, and this is, happening across the nation, but no one's actually looking at the data of what's going on in our urban centers. And so the Urban Indian Health Institute, where they've decided we're going to start this because there's no data and because there's no information. And so they did work in 71 cities, and they started collecting information on missing and murdered Indigenous women in those 71 cities. Within Alaska, that included Sitka, Juneau, Utqiagvik, Anchorage, there might be a couple more that I'm missing.
Yeah, Fairbanks wasn't it?
Okay. So we're looking at that, and some of the ways that they went to collect information was doing Freedom of Information Act requests. There were a lot of problems with that system. There were a lot of issues when trying to get information out of Department of Public Safety. They went to them and actually said, no, we're not going to pull up this data for you. And they actually had to call someone else, Native leaders, to put pressure on the Department of Public Safety to say, we need you to release that data. We need you to give some information. And while they gave some, it says, in the report, the Alaska State Troopers said it was too burdensome. And it was too burdensome to them, because it estimated that there were 800 and 1,200 homicides of Alaska Native women since 1940. And it required too much work for them to process that data to give to us. So after they got people involved, they put pressure on them. The agency then offered to provide some of the data, only from 2013 to 2018, because that had been digitized. They also went to different police departments. Went to Juneau Police Department, and when they put in that report, they ended up closing out that report because they thought it was coming from a different organization, or they got it mixed up and they closed it and never gave out data. I will say the Anchorage Police Department actually was one of the first to provide comprehensive data on missing and murdered Indigenous women, so thank you for that. But when they did that report, from my understanding too, where we might get more information on APD, is some of their information in there was wrong when cross-referencing it with different data that Urban Indian Health Institute had. And again, a lot of misclassification of not identifying which one of these cases are Alaska Native women. So there are ways that our police departments can be working together to ensure that we're getting the correct data and that we're updating the records. And Tammy's going to get a little bit more into some Alaska-specific data. But out of this report, one of the 3 things that they focused on: no protections. As I said, murder is the 3rd leading cause of death of American Indian Alaska Native women. And through the nation, if you look on reservations, it's 10 times higher than the national average. Missing in the data, in 2016, 5,712 reports of missing American Indian Alaska Native women. The U.S. Department of Justice logged just 116 of those cases. Again, we have the misclassifying problem of labeling it to be suicide rather than homicides, mislabeling the origin of the location where these crimes are taking place. The other part.
I was closer to the question.
So I think I don't understand that point. Maybe. So saying someone was missing and family reported it, but then Department of Justice only looked at 116 cases. Is that? And is a report, could like 6 family members report? So that might be.
So
what are those numbers?
The Department of Justice has this, what is it, USNAM's database that they have, and out of those 5,712 reports within the U.S. Department of Justice database, only 116 of them actually got input in. Why? I can't tell you why that only that much those cases got put in versus not having all of them reported. And Tammy might have a little more information on how that works.
What happens is that, and this is a Department of Justice, and the police department probably knows this better, is that there's a lot of individual, whether it's reservation police or it's BIA police or it's other police departments that don't have access to those databases. And so it's not being entered accurately. And so the NAMUS system, which is a product of the Department of Justice and a project under the Department of Justice, has been able to collect this data exponentially, not necessarily through the police departments, but through family members or through self-reporting or through other kinds of opportunities to get that information. And so that's where the 5,700 and some odd numbers come from, and yet the 116 are really the only ones that have been acted on.
So am I to say there's 5,712 missing women?
That's what they've got collected, but we know it's much higher than that.
So the other piece of this is missing in the media, is what this Urban Indian Health Institute focused on. More than 95% of the cases in the study that they had done were never covered by national or international media. You know, we've seen cases here recently that have made it into the news, and I would say that, you know, I know that those are hard stories to tell, and I know it's deeply troubling for our communities, but we need to know the extent of what's going on, the extent of the problem, because if it's just being ignored, then we're going to continue thinking that this isn't a problem. And clearly the numbers show, and this is really just scratching the surface here. So just a few other things I just want to point out before I hand it over to Tammy to get into a little more specifics on Alaska and Anchorage too. So Abigail Echo-Hop, she's the director of the Urban Indian Health Institute, and has really been just a steadfast leader in helping get this information. They had a very limited amount of funding to do this report, but they realized how important it was. And they're actually working on a report that's going to be specific to Alaska. So we're waiting for that secondary report to come out by the end of this year, I believe is what she was aiming for. So, and this is, again, just some of the numbers that we have here. 506 missing murdered Indigenous women cases were identified in 71 selected urban cities. They did that through, like I said, FOIA requests, working with tribal members, working with just a number of people in the communities. 128 of those cases were missing murdered Indigenous women. 280 were cases of murdered Indigenous women. 98 with an unknown status, 29 being the median age. And the other point that I wanted to make that's not on this one right now is 153 cases were identified that were not in law enforcement records that they found. And Anchorage and Alaska is in the top 10 for that. We'll get into more, but there were 9 cases that were found that were not in any of our law enforcement data. And again, this is scratching the surface. This is not, we did not even get all of the, when doing Freedom of Information Act requests, Alaska had so many fees that they were not able to pay them in order to get all the information from the cities in Alaska that they put in requests for. So this doesn't encompass, this is just really kind of bare minimum numbers that they could do on a little bit of funding. So I'm interested to see what their next report's going to look like, and I hope that our agencies will be working with them a little bit better to ensure that we can get more information. And I'm going to hand over to Tammy to get into specifics.
Thank you for allowing us to speak today. And I think that we need to understandably, we were in a roundtable discussion on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls with Senator Murkowski yesterday. And one of the things that she started off with was that yesterday's news with the 11% of increase in rapes since 2018. And it's disturbing because, unfortunately, if you were even to break that down more, the specifics about that are probably that Alaska Native or American Indian women were highly represented in that 11% increase. And that's still disturbing. This is 2019. And we shouldn't even be having this conversation. So one of the things that we need to know is that Alaska is among the top 10 states with the highest rates of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We really do not understand the actual scope of the problem. Again, that's what they've been discussing in terms of lack of data. And for whatever reason, that data is what drives a lot of the information that people want to hear from us. Just for instance, this body. I wonder if you're questioning why are we having this conversation. Well, Anchorage, being the largest city in the state of Alaska, is also the out-migration center for 229 tribal communities. And you are getting those folks are landing right here in your lap. And so just listening to some of the budget concerns and the other issues that you're already addressing, that's impacted directly by what we're talking about today. So I think it's really important that we have these conversations and that we continue to have these conversations, because it's going to take all of us to see any kind of change in the numbers that we don't have, so to speak. Unfortunately, with this Urban Institute study that happened, is that we're not even addressing the issue of the tribal communities in Alaska, because we are only addressing the cases that are here in Anchorage. It identifies the agencies in Alaska that obstructed the ability to obtain the information, and fortunately Anchorage was not one of those places that did that. But so we don't have really current or accurate numbers in Alaska because people do not want to acknowledge the problem to the extent that they're not keeping the data that we need in order to further the information, education, and hopefully mitigate some of the problem. We can't do that because people don't listen if you don't have the information, correct? So I think that the incomplete data really hinders the change, and data is often used to identify the problems and persuade change. But if agencies are not collecting the accurate data, then you're not going to believe us. You know, it's anecdotal. And anecdotal is all great, except for, you know, I could say, well, my auntie was accosted over here on 4th Avenue the other night when she was going between the hotel at the Hilton and over here to a meeting, and but there was never any police report done. There was never anything done, and she was badly hurt and injured. But they did have the data over at the Alaska Native Medical Center because she ended up over there in the emergency room. So we're not sharing, we're not partnering, we're not getting the information necessary to make the budget decisions or make the decisions that might be necessary for the police department to do their job effectively and or impactfully. That's going to make it helpful for all of us. And I can't emphasize that enough. And so unfortunately, and I think we're on slide 8, unfortunately Alaska does rank 4th in the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls cases as we can document it at this point. Anecdotally, we know it's higher. Anchorage also is the 3rd highest number of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls cases out of the 71 cities in the UIHI study. And that was 31 cities that were included in that Freedom of Act, Public Information Act. And we, unfortunately, are the 3rd highest in that study. And then we talked about the 153 cases that were through research methods outside of the Freedom of Information Act requests, the governmental missing persons databases, news reports, social media, and advocacy sites, direct contact with families and community members who volunteered the information, found another 153 cases just in the short time that they had the study. And this is through the 71 cities that they studied, not all in Anchorage, that were not in law enforcement records of any kind case. Of all that data gathered, and I'm reading it directly from the study, gathered in the 40 cities where the FOA request for produced results, 42% of those cases were found after diligent research and not present in law enforcement. This 42% was made up of the cases from 26 of the 40 cities, 65%. And of the 153 cases identified that were not located in any law enforcement records, Anchorage ranks in the top 10, again, at number 5, of the 9 cases that were identified in Anchorage. So it's really important that the research methods outside of the FOA request found that the 153 cases were not in law enforcement records. But what's really disturbing about all of that is why aren't they? What is creating that where we're not, for instance, if an individual is murdered, are we misclassifying that, and why? Why are we misclassifying that? Why are we having such a high rate of our group, which is the Alaska Native people, with the smallest percentage of in the state? We have 16 to 19% of the population, but we are overrepresented in just about every type of agencies or law enforcement or any other kinds of service provision that's happening in this state. So there's definitely some issues that we have to address, and that's all part of that. I think the other piece that we have to really look at is that what the study, and I think we're going to move on because I know that we have a time frame and there was other people, so I wanted to just really briefly, is that the study illustrates the maze of injustice that impacts missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We know that this is not a new problem. We also know that, but this has not been a public problem. It's not been publicized. And so through recent efforts on a lot of tribal communities around this country, we've been able to publicize that and made it to Congress. We're making real impacts into this, but we're not making enough because it hasn't changed. The numbers aren't changing. And so I'm going to go ahead, there's a lot more. I'm going to go ahead and leave my portion of that so that we can wrap it up. But thank you for listening.
just a couple of things here that I wanted to outline. You know, a lot of times when you go to these meetings, it's like, okay, you know the problem, now what? And so here are just some proposals, some ideas. This definitely is not inclusive. This is going to take a lot of our entities working together, our indigenous communities, our nonprofits, local, state, federal, tribal, everyone working together on what we can do. You heard some of the issues that we brought up that was going on. So updating law enforcement data. What can we do to make sure that that cases are not being misclassified, or we're not missing them in the data at all? What are ways that we can do that? And I think that that's something that we can be doing on all levels of law enforcement. Again, working together. How do we share this data? How do we have protocols? We need protocols in place to ensure that data is actually being shared. Funding. Funding is also something that, you know, all of you can really look into. Making sure that investigations, and I guess that would be some of my questions for APD as far as getting into more is, do you have enough resources for investigations? Are there cold cases that are still open that are not being looked into? So we heard recently about Sophie, that they finally ran the DNA and they found the person who had murdered her. What other cases are out there that we're just not processing? And so that would be some of the questions. And record keeping protocols. We clearly are not keeping adequate records and procedures in place. So what does that look like, and how can we do that? Again, that would be questions for law enforcement on all levels, whether it be APD, JPD, or state troopers.
Thank you, Ms. Closer. Can we get a motion to extend the meeting by 15 minutes?
Move to extend by 15 minutes.
Second.
Is this going to become available online?
Yeah, Ms. Closer, can we get this in electronic form?
Yes.
And maybe we'll post it on the Assembly website. And then also, obviously, we want specific proposals to go to APD. So, Mr. Dice, I'll put you in the queue, but first, do you have any more slides, Ms. Closer?
That's the one other thing I just want to mention is there are people that have organizations like, I know the City of Seattle legislature have been doing resolutions, so that might be an idea for you guys to look into as well. And then really the last one was just showing kind of some of our indigenous organizations. This is a very small percentage of folks that are working on this issue together. And again, just re-emphasizing that we need to come together. And who does this include? We just want to stress it out that it doesn't include just the indigenous organizations, but it includes everyone to make sure that we're working together. So that's where I'll leave it.
Wonderful. I have a question for the chief, and then Mr. Dice is in the queue. Anybody else? So, Chief Dahl, the presentation talked a lot about data and about the fact that we might be misclassifying people. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that. Do we track the race of the victim?
Yes.
And you know, why is the belief that maybe we are misclassifying a lot of that? What thoughts do you have for that?
So I think that well, first of all, I want to thank the presenter because that was a really good presentation, and I really appreciate you highlighting Anchorage's response to UIHI when they were completing their report. We were one of the few agencies that actually responded fairly quickly with pretty decent data. But I agree, there are gaps in the data, and I think that sometimes race does get misclassified when we're taking police reports for a variety of reasons. It can be because somebody somewhere in the chain of data makes an observation and an assumption based on that observation that may not be accurate. It could be that at whatever point that particular person went to Department of Motor Vehicles and created their record there for the first time, that was misclassified, and so that carries that. Those kind of data errors, especially in today's day and age where data gets copied and copied and copied, those things carry through for a really long time. So it's just important that when we're working a case, especially if we have contact with family members, that just gets classified correctly. We don't always have the luxury of that. Sometimes we have victims that, you know, if there's no family member or other person to advocate for that person, especially in a homicide, right, where we can't talk to the victim, you know, that could be a challenge. But it's something that we work to try to get that information to be correct in our database, but, you know, I'm sure that there are probably errors there.
Mr. Closer, do you have anything to say in response to that, or any questions for the chief on that topic?
No, I just, I'd be interested maybe more talking offline of how, ways that we can help and how we work with our tribal communities too. If there aren't families, if there are tribes that might be able to help, and especially even connecting with resources, I think we need to make sure that we're working with our tribal governments as well.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson and Ms. LaFrance.
4 quick questions. No big deal. Do you work with the Wellness Warriors?
Are you asking me?
Whoever.
Wellness Warriors is a really good model, and it's a very, yes.
Okay.
Yes and no. Okay.
All right. Secondly, some of us have really pushed for the processing of the rape kits. And am I right in assuming that you all would press for that? Thirdly, in our state, 1/3 of the juvenile rape victims are little boys. Is there any percentage with that amongst Alaska Native people?
The statistics are really missing. No. We understand that there's there, yeah.
Okay, and lastly, I'm not surprised at all that most of the perpetrators are males. I think males contribute most to lots of problems in our world, which is probably politically incorrect. But do you have any data on the origin or ethnicity of the perpetrators? Is there any statistical data on that?
Not much. It's very limited.
Yeah, all right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the presenters for being here and to the co-chairs for putting this on the agenda today. 2 questions, one for APD and then a quick one for the presenters. Chief Dahl, there was an example mentioned, the assault example, where the victim was taken to the Native hospital. And in that case, I mean, my assumption would be that there would be a police report or no provider would call the police in that instance. Can you speak to that and how often that might happen where police are not called in those cases?
Sure, thank you. I really appreciate, it's Tammy, right, pointed out that a lot of this information is anecdotal. And I appreciate the fact that you did point that out, because it makes it really hard to deal with. And she's right, like not having data makes a lot of these conversations more difficult. And I completely agree that there are things that are underreported, and that makes these conversations a lot tougher to have. And so you have all heard me over the last few years say repeatedly, like, we absolutely have to have these things reported to the police department. Like, it's really difficult for us to deal with things that are happening if we don't know about it. And so in a case like that, the assault example, typically care providers are required reporters, and so they do report sometimes, but that's only if somebody sought out medical assistance, and not everybody does. And sometimes these things happen, and it's not reported. And you know, I was present yesterday at the Wellness Warriors kickoff of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and also at the kickoff last night of Domestic Violence Action Month. And both of those things also suffer from underreporting because of the nature of the criminal activity, right? And so when these victims, especially when they're in domestic relationships, like those are things that happen in people's homes. They're not always reported to police, and so that makes all of this a more difficult problem to tackle, frankly. So I just really appreciate you highlighting that example when talking about the data.
Mr. Chairman,
yeah.
Second question to the presenters. I think I heard you mention that Alaska had so many fees associated with getting the data. That's correct. So different agencies charge. Okay. What are those fees? I mean, what kind of fees are we talking about?
copies.
Okay.
95, or what was it, 93% of the invoices that the study incurred were from Alaska. So different agencies were charging for copy fees, for staff researching, for et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of out of the 71 communities that the information was received from, 93% of the invoice charges came from the Alaska agencies, and so that's problematic, especially if you're on a really limited budget. I think it was $4,900 and some odd dollars, and they had very limited funding to do the study. So
Yeah, so the cost, if they were to pay all the fees for FOIA requests, here was $4,464. And yeah, the Alaska agencies provided 93% of the total cost for those invoices. The invoices that Urban Indian Health Institute was able to pay was $68. And from that $68, from 3 different cities, it resulted in an additional 51 cases logged.
Interesting. Your follow-up to that?
Well, no, just a quick question on, I think I heard you mention 229 tribal communities have Anchorage as out migration? What does that mean exactly?
It's out migration from our rural areas. We call it out migration. And a lot of our rural areas are emptying out, and they come to Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Juneau. I mean, that's the main hub, and Anchorage being the main one. So yes, and so all of the resulting issues that go along with that large out-migration from our rural communities.
That's permanent, not just like coming here temporarily?
Not necessarily permanent. There's situations, for instance, domestic violence is a really good example of that. And that is that if somebody is coming in to seek services, medical care, could be long-term, they could be escaping a situation. It could be the batterer or the abuser who's coming in to do a batterer's intervention, which only certain few of the urban areas have those available. I mean, there's just a multitude of issues, economics, just a multitude of issues.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. So I guess I have a question, but first let's make a statement that, I hope that this is an ongoing conversation, and that as sort of specific policies are created or developed, that come back to us and perhaps the AP directly, and we can vet those over the coming months and even years. But I had a question for the APD along those lines. So, it's no mystery to any of us that we have a lot of folks, indigenous folks, living in Anchorage, both those who grew up here and those who came in from the rural areas that you described. Does the APD have any liaison to the Native Hospital, for example, or anyone specifically in the force who is kind of designated for these kind of issues?
I don't know that we have a single point of just one person, although I'm usually reluctant to have one person be responsible for anything, because as soon as that person's gone, then there's a gap and it doesn't get done. So we do directly liaise with South Central Foundation and the Native Medical Campus, for a variety of things. But I think that the out-migration point is really good, and it's something that we recognize at APD. If you ever see me talking with another group of law enforcement, you see some of the things that APD is participating in. We are working really hard on our statewide partnerships at a variety of different levels. And the reason is, and I think sometimes in Anchorage, people are like, well, why is APD working on something that's not in Anchorage? It's maybe in a different part of the state, or you're working with a law enforcement agency from a different part of the state. It's because we recognize that Anchorage is a hub, right? And it's the biggest hub. And so everybody from all over the state comes through Anchorage at some point. So we have to have those relationships established. So when there is a problem and it does come to town and we end up dealing with it here, that we're also able to pass that information off to maybe our partner agency, wherever those folks are from, or if it's a longer term problem, not just with something that's acutely happening right now in town, but maybe a problem with trafficking, alcohol or drugs, or anything else back and forth to a village, that we're working with those agencies. Because just as sure as the problem is happening in Anchorage and then ending up in the village, the reverse is also true, and it's coming to town. So we can't pretend like we live on an island and those things don't affect us. They definitely affect us.
Thank you, Chief. So at this time, we usually have a couple minutes for audience participation. Is there anyone who'd like to comment on anything that was discussed at this meeting? Yes?
Yes, on the presenter. Recently there was
Al, can you identify yourself?
Oh, Al Millspaw, University of Community Council. Recently there was I think $2 million provided for public safety for the villages of Alaska. Was that part of the problem before because of lack of funds? And now that more money is coming in, might that help resolve the problems, some of the problems?
I guess I'm not sure.
USDOJ, after the Attorney General was here, are you familiar with that?
Oh, okay. Because we're also getting cuts at the same time.
I know, right?
I guess
Really
that's the problem too. Is we've gotten $6 million in cuts over the last couple of years to the Village Public Safety Officer program, and then I know with Attorney General Barr coming in with additional funds. So I would actually have to look into that even more to figure out where the funds are going, and then plus how does that offset even the cuts that we're having, because we're still in the problem of only 1 in 3 villages even have a public safety officer.
Can I tag on to that, Chair? So I think it's important to note that there's state funding for those programs, and then this is federal funding, which I think is what you're talking about, the recent announcement of $10-point-something million through the U.S. Department of Justice. And figuring out how to layer that money in a way that is beneficial to the communities that do not have regular law enforcement. I mean, that's the primary idea behind that, but it's challenging for a variety of reasons. Frankly, that's something that APD is participating in the discussion on, even though we don't provide law enforcement outside the bowl. Just because, again, that same discussion, we know that's something that, those problems come to town and they get exported from town, so we have to be part of that.
Thank you. Mr. Reno?
Russ Reno from the Downtown Community Council. Is there any of the money that you were being charged that you're held up in getting? Is there any fees that are in Anchorage that you have to pay to get documentation? Any extra fees that are associated with getting copies of the report?
Oh, this one to me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Any outstanding fees that we have, or?
Is there any fee? Are you charged a fee? Have you been told that you have to pay a fee in order to get any documentation you may need to get to the village or to get to your own organization or what you're trying to do to document this information?
There are different fees, yeah.
I guess I would follow up with to the city. Is there a way we could? Is anybody entertained a way that we could get them exempt from being charged those fees in order to get this data collected? Because it sounds like it's a pretty important issue that they're having to just collect data.
Yeah, I mean, I think the request is going to APD, right, Chief?
Would you like me to answer that, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
So, I mean, the answer is yes. I'm sure if you asked us for information, especially through a FOIA request, you were given the response that includes the fees and the staff time and everything else, because that is basically our standard response. And this is an important issue, and the collection of data is, and we've talked about that a lot, and that is an important part of it. But from the APD perspective, this is not the only entity that's requesting data from us, and so if we were to waive fees for one group, then every single group would ask for that. And it's not that APD doesn't want to provide the data. In fact, we do, and I think that you ended up getting a lot of it from us anyway, probably directly from the homicide sergeant at the time and stuff like that. So we do try to do that, but for us right now, it's a resource issue, and that was mentioned at one point in the presentation. To try to highlight that, right now, if you're just an average person and you file a police report and then you want a copy of that police report, it's taking 8 to 10 months for us to get that to you because we're so backlogged on processing requests for information, and FOIA requests get slotted in with all the other requests. They don't get treated differently, or especially because even though those are important requests, so is the average Anchorage resident who comes and requests something from the police department, and so we're working through those chronologically. But a lot of these big data requests really are part of research projects like this, and the research is really important, but the request comes in and it's actually a request for us to do research on their behalf, and again, on a very important topic, but we have to take staff time away from everything else we're doing in order to do that. So unfortunately, those fee notices get sent, and that's part of that prioritization of data requests. So
So unfortunately, we're out of time. I'll just say on that, that's a good plug for us to increase your non-sworn staff.
I hate to be the guy that's always asking for more resource, but
We're going to be discussing that in the upcoming budget cycle, and hopefully you guys will participate in it too. All right, well, thank you very much. Motion to adjourn.